I was 72 hours away from being homeless when the sheriff walked into the county office and said my name like he'd been looking for me his whole life. Before you explore where this story takes us, hit subscribe while you're here. Tomorrow, I'm dropping something special that'll leave you absolutely speechless. I was standing at the front desk of Child Protective Services in Boulder, Colorado, watching Mrs. Martinez print out my discharge papers. 18 years, 3 months, and 16 days in the system, and this was how it ended. A manila folder, $200 in cash, and a list of homeless shelters that might have bed space. The waiting room smelled like industrial cleaner and broken promises. I'd been sitting there for 40 minutes, my entire life packed into a black duffel bag at my feet, when Sheriff Davidson pushed through the front doors like a man on a mission. He was maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of weathered face that comes from spending more time outdoors than in. His uniform was crisp, but his boots were dusty, like he'd driven straight from somewhere far outside city limits. "Is there a Grace Monroe here?" he called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of caseworkers and crying children. I raised my hand slowly, confused. I'd never been in trouble with the law, never even gotten a speeding ticket, because I'd never owned a car to speed in. He walked over and extended his hand. "Grace Monroe? I'm Sheriff Tom Davidson from Ridgway County. I've been trying to track you down for 3 weeks." "I don't understand," I said, shaking his hand. "What's this about?" Mrs. Martinez appeared beside us, looking just as confused. "Sheriff, is there a problem?" "No problem," he said, pulling a thick envelope from his jacket. "Just some unfinished business involving Miss Monroe here and her great-aunt's estate." My great-aunt. I didn't even know I had a great-aunt. My mother had died when I was 6 from an overdose, and my father was never in the picture. I'd spent my childhood bouncing between 7 different foster homes before landing in a group facility when I was 14. Nobody had ever mentioned any extended family. "I think you have the wrong person," I said quietly. "I don't have any family." Sheriff Davidson smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "That's where you're wrong, Miss Monroe. You had a great-aunt named Eleanor Hastings. She passed away 4 months ago at the age of 83, and, according to her will, she left you everything." The room seemed to tilt. Left me what? "A ranch, 2,000 acres just outside Ridgway, about 3 hours west of here. Cattle, horses, the whole operation, plus a decent sum in a savings account." He paused, studying my face. "Eleanor was your grandmother's sister. She never married, never had kids of her own. Spent her whole life working that ranch with her brother until he passed 30 years ago. Been running it alone ever since." Mrs. Martinez was reading over the documents Sheriff Davidson had spread across her desk. "This all appears legitimate," she said, her voice tight with surprise. "There's a property deed here with Grace's name on it, along with transferred documents from the county recorder's office." I couldn't process what I was hearing. Why didn't she ever contact me? Why didn't anyone tell me about her? Sheriff Davidson's expression grew somber. "From what I understand, there was bad blood between Eleanor and your grandmother. Some kind of falling out over your mother's struggles with addiction. Eleanor blamed herself for not doing more, for letting pride keep her from reaching out. By the time she tried to find you, you were already deep in the system, and she convinced herself you'd be better off without an old rancher dragging you back to a dying town. So she just watched from a distance? Not exactly. He pulled out another envelope, this one yellowed with age. She hired a private investigator to keep tabs on you over the years, made sure you were safe, made sure you were in decent placements, and she spent the last 10 years of her life making sure everything would go to you when she passed. She worked that ranch until 6 months before she died, saving every penny, fixing up the property, leaving you something solid. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in shaky cursive. "Dear Grace," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you've finally learned about the family you came from. I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to be in your life when you needed me. I told myself you deserved better than a bitter old woman on a failing ranch. But the truth is, I was scared. Scared I'd fail you the way I failed your mother and your grandmother. Scared I didn't have what it took to raise a child who'd already been through so much." The letter continued for 2 pages, explaining the ranch's history, the challenges I'd face, and her hopes for what I might do with the property. She ended with an apology and a promise. "The ranch isn't much by modern standards, but it's been in our family for 4 generations. The land is good, the water rights are solid, and if you're willing to work hard, you can make a decent living. I've arranged for Ben Tucker, my foreman, to stay on for 6 months after my death to help with the transition. He knows everything about the operation, and he's a good man. Trust him. And Grace, please forgive an old woman who loved you from afar, but didn't have the courage to love you up close. You come from strong women who survived hard times. That strength is in your blood. Use it." I looked up at Sheriff Davidson, tears streaming down my face. She really left me a ranch? 2,000 acres of the prettiest land in Colorado, he confirmed. Ben Tucker's been running it in trust, waiting for you to turn 18 so the property could transfer. He's a good guy, been with Eleanor for 25 years. He's expecting you. Mrs. Martinez was watching me with something like wonder on her face. In 18 years, she'd probably never seen a kid age out with anywhere to go, let alone a 2,000-acre ranch waiting for them. "When can I see it?" I asked. "Right now, if you want," Sheriff Davidson said. "I drove down here specifically to bring you back. Figured you might not have reliable transportation." I looked at my duffel bag, at the discharge papers that would have sent me to a homeless shelter, at the sheriff who'd spent 3 weeks tracking me down just to deliver good news. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt something unfurling in my chest. Hope. "Let's go," I said. The drive to Ridgway took just over 3 hours, winding through mountain passes and valleys that grew increasingly remote. Sheriff Davidson kept up a steady stream of conversation, telling me about the town, the community, and what I could expect. "Ridgway's small," he explained. "Population of about 800, though that swells to maybe 1,200 if you count all the ranch families in the surrounding area. We've got 1 grocery store, a hardware shop, a diner, and a bar that serves the best burgers in 3 counties. Most folks make their living ranching or working for the few remaining timber operations." "What about Eleanor?" I asked. "What was she like?" His expression softened. "Tough as boot leather and twice as stubborn. She could outwork men half her age and never complained about anything except government regulations and city folks who didn't understand ranch life. But she had a soft spot for people struggling. During the recession back in 2008, She hired 3 families who'd lost everything, gave them work and housing until they got back on their feet. Never talked about it, but everyone knew. We turned off the highway onto a gravel road marked by a weathered wooden sign that read, Hastings Ranch, established 1892. The road wound through pine forests before opening onto rolling pastures where cattle grazed peacefully. In the distance, mountains rose against an impossibly blue sky. "This is all yours," Sheriff Davidson said, gesturing at the landscape. 2,000 acres from that ridgeline to the creek at the eastern boundary. My throat tightened. I'd never owned anything, never had more than a drawer's worth of possessions, and now I owned land that stretched farther than I could see. The main house came into view, a 2-story log structure with a green metal roof and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It looked solid and well-maintained, with flower boxes under the windows and rocking chairs on the porch. Behind it stood a massive red barn, several outbuildings, and a network of corrals and fencing. A man emerged from the barn as we pulled up, tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and gray hair tucked under a worn baseball cap. He walked with the distinctive gait of someone who'd spent his life on horseback. "That's Ben Tucker," Sheriff Davidson said. Ben approached the truck, and I could see him studying me through the windshield. When I stepped out, he removed his hat and extended his hand. "Miss Grace," he said, his voice gravelly but warm. "I've been waiting to meet you. Eleanor talked about you all the time, especially toward the end." "She never talked to me at all," I said, then immediately regretted how bitter I sounded. But Ben just nodded. "I know, she regretted that more than anything, but she did right by you in the end, and that's got to count for something." He gave me a tour of the property, starting with the house. The interior was clean and simply furnished, with hardwood floors and large windows that let in incredible light. Eleanor's bedroom was on the ground floor, and I could see where she'd spent her final months, a hospital bed positioned to face the window overlooking the barn. She wanted to see the ranch until the very end, Ben explained. Wouldn't hear of going to any facility. Died right there in that bed, watching the sun come up over the pasture. Upstairs were 3 more bedrooms, all empty except for basic furniture. Ben led me to the smallest one at the end of the hall. "Eleanor prepared this room specifically for you," he said, opening the door. Inside was a bedroom that looked like it had been decorated with care and attention. A handmade quilt covered the bed in shades of blue and green that reminded me of the landscape outside. A desk sat under the window, and the bookshelves were filled with ranching guides, veterinary manuals, and books on everything from horse training to sustainable agriculture. On the dresser was a photograph in a silver frame. It showed a young woman, maybe 19 or 20, with dark hair and my exact eyes. She was smiling at the camera, standing next to an older version of herself who could only be Eleanor. "That's your grandmother," Ben said quietly. "Sarah. This was Eleanor's room when she was young, and she fixed it up hoping you'd want to use it." I picked up the photograph, tracing my grandmother's face. What happened between them? Pride mostly. Sarah wanted to leave ranch life behind, move to the city. Eleanor thought she was making a mistake, and they fought about it. Sarah left, met your grandfather, had your mother. By the time Eleanor realized she'd been wrong to push so hard, too much time had passed. Then Sarah got sick and died, and your mother. He trailed off. Got addicted to drugs and died when I was 6. I finished. I know the story. Eleanor blamed herself for all of it. Thought if she'd been less rigid, maybe Sarah would have stayed close. Maybe your mother would have had family support during her struggles. It ate at her. What comes next is something I never saw coming. Stick with me and make sure you subscribe. The next morning, Ben taught me the basics of ranch operations. We started before dawn, checking on the cattle herd that numbered around 300 head. He showed me how to spot signs of illness, how to read the land for the best grazing rotation, and how to maintain the water systems that kept the operation running. Eleanor ran a lean operation, Ben explained as we rode horseback along the fence line. She believed in quality over quantity. These cattle are bred for hardiness and meat quality, not just size. She built relationships with buyers who appreciated that, and they paid premium prices because they knew Hastings beef was reliable. By mid-morning, I was exhausted and sore from the unfamiliar physical work. But I was also exhilarated. There was something deeply satisfying about being outside, working with animals, feeling the sun on my face and wind in my hair. We stopped for lunch at a creek that cut through the eastern pasture. Ben pulled sandwiches from his saddlebag, and we sat on the bank, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "Can I ask you something?" I said. "Shoot." "Why did you stay? After Eleanor died, you could have taken another job. Why wait around for some kid you'd never met?" Ben was quiet for a moment, chewing thoughtfully. "Because Eleanor asked me to, and because I owed her. 25 years ago, I was in a bad way, drinking too much, making poor choices, about to lose everything. Eleanor hired me when nobody else would, gave me a chance to prove I could be better than my worst mistakes. She saved my life. Simple as that. Staying on to help you was the least I could do to repay that." "What if I'm terrible at this?" I asked quietly. "What if I can't handle it?" "Then you'll learn. Eleanor wasn't born knowing how to run a ranch. Her daddy taught her, and his daddy taught him. That's how it works. Knowledge passes down, and you earn it through mistakes and hard work." He looked at me seriously. "But I'll tell you what Eleanor told me when I was struggling. This life isn't for everyone. It's hard, it's isolating sometimes, and it doesn't pay great compared to city jobs. But if it gets in your blood, there's nothing else quite like it. The land teaches you who you are, strips away all the pretense. You'll know pretty quick if this is your path or not." Over the following weeks, I threw myself into learning everything I could. Ben was a patient teacher, never making me feel stupid when I asked basic questions or made obvious mistakes. He taught me to ride properly, to rope, to doctor sick animals, to maintain equipment, and to read weather patterns that could mean the difference between a successful season and disaster. The physical work transformed me. I developed calluses, muscles I'd never known existed, and a deep tan from hours spent outdoors. More importantly, I started to feel connected to the land in a way I'd never felt connected to anything. The ranch wasn't just property. It was a living, breathing entity that demanded attention, care, and respect. Sheriff Davidson stopped by regularly, checking on my progress and introducing me to neighbors. The community was small and tight-knit, and I could tell they were reserving judgment about whether this city girl would stick around or give up when things got tough. The first real test came in late June when a storm rolled through. bringing hail and flash flooding. Ben and I spent 14 hours straight moving cattle to higher ground, reinforcing weak points in fencing and securing equipment. By the time it was over, I was soaked, exhausted, and covered in mud. But we'd saved the herd. Only 2 calves were lost, and the damage to the property was minimal. Ben looked at me across the barn as we dried off, and I saw approval in his eyes for the first time. "You did good today," he said simply. Those 4 words meant more than any compliment I'd ever received. I started attending community events, slowly making connections with other ranchers. There was Maria Sanchez, who ran a sheep operation on the neighboring property and became my first real friend. She was 23, had taken over her family's ranch when her father died, and understood exactly what I was going through. "It's overwhelming at first," she told me over coffee at the local diner. "You'll have days where you want to quit, where you wonder if you're completely crazy for trying this. But then you'll have moments, perfect moments, where everything clicks and you'll understand why people choose this life." I also met the Wallace family, who'd owned the feed store in town for 3 generations. Old Frank Wallace took a shine to me, probably because I reminded him of Eleanor. "Your great-aunt was something special," he told me one afternoon as I picked up supplies. "Tough as they come, but fair. She'd give you the shirt off her back if you needed it, but God help you if you tried to cheat her or mistreat an animal. She had standards." As summer turned to fall, I discovered something unexpected in the ranch house. I was cleaning out Eleanor's office, sorting through decades of paperwork, when I found a locked drawer in her desk. The key was hanging on a small hook under the desktop, and inside was a collection of items that made my breath catch. There were report cards, mine from various schools I'd attended, birthday cards she'd apparently sent to my foster homes, most marked "Return to Sender" with notes saying I'd moved, school photos tracking my growth from a gap-toothed 7-year-old to an awkward teenager. Eleanor had been documenting my life from a distance, collecting evidence of my existence even though we'd never met. But it was the journal that broke me. Eleanor had kept a diary of sorts, entries dated sporadically over 18 years. Each one was about me, her thoughts and hopes and fears for the granddaughter of her estranged sister. "Grace is 9 today," one entry read. "The investigator says she's in a good placement with a family in Littleton. She's doing well in school, loves to read. I sent a card and a book, though I doubt she'll ever receive it. I wonder if she thinks about family, if she knows there's someone out here thinking about her." Another, from 5 years later. "Grace aged into a group home. The report says she's struggling, acting out. I want so badly to intervene, to bring her here where she'd have stability. But what do I have to offer? An old woman and a failing ranch? She deserves better than my guilt and regret." And finally, from just months before she died, "I'm leaving Grace everything. It's not enough to make up for my absence, but maybe it'll give her a foundation. Maybe the ranch will teach her what I never could, that she comes from strong women who built something lasting. I wish I'd been brave enough to be part of her life. I hope she can forgive me." I sat on the floor of that office and cried for the first time since arriving at the ranch. Not tears of sadness exactly, but of release. All those years of feeling unwanted and forgotten, and there'd been someone out there thinking about me, caring enough to watch from a distance, even if she was too afraid to reach out. The journal entries revealed something else, too. Eleanor hadn't just left me the ranch as an apology. She'd left it because she believed I could handle it, because she'd watched me survive the system and saw strength she recognized from her own life. Fall brought the yearly cattle sale, and it was my first real test as the ranch's owner. Ben helped me select which animals to sell and which to keep for breeding stock. We transported them to the regional auction, and I stood nervously as bidders evaluated my herd. The Hastings brand still carried weight. Buyers knew Eleanor's reputation for quality, and they were willing to take a chance that I'd maintain those standards. When the final tallies came in, we'd earned $28,000, more than enough to cover operating expenses and leave a healthy profit. "You did it," Ben said, shaking my hand. "First sale as owner, and you maintained Eleanor's reputation. That's no small thing." That winter was the hardest period of my life. The work didn't stop just because temperatures dropped and snow piled up. Cattle still needed feeding, water systems needed constant monitoring to prevent freezing, and equipment broke down in the cold. There were days when I questioned everything, when the isolation and relentless physical demands made me wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. But there were also moments of perfect clarity. Standing on the porch at dawn, watching elk move across the pasture, helping a cow through a difficult birth and seeing the calf take its first wobbling steps, sitting by the fire with Maria and other neighbors, sharing stories and knowledge passed down through generations. By spring, something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't just occupying Eleanor's ranch anymore. I was running it, making decisions, planning for the future. I invested in new fencing, upgraded the barn's ventilation system, and started researching sustainable ranching practices that could improve both profitability and environmental impact. Ben's 6-month commitment had long since expired, but he showed no signs of leaving. One evening, as we finished up evening chores, I asked him about it. "You planning to stay?" I said. He smiled. "If you'll have me. I'm getting too old to break in a new place, and you're getting good at this. Seems like a partnership worth continuing." "I can't pay you what you're worth." "You're paying me fair wages and giving me a purpose. At my age, that's worth more than money." He paused. "Besides, I made a promise to Eleanor, and I keep my promises. I told her I'd make sure you had a fair shot at this life. That takes longer than 6 months." As my first year on the ranch drew to a close, I realized I'd found something I'd been searching for my entire life. Not just a home or property, but a sense of belonging that went deeper than place. I belonged to this land in a way that transcended ownership. I was part of its story, part of a legacy that stretched back 4 generations and hopefully forward into a future I was just beginning to imagine. One afternoon, I drove into town and stopped at the sheriff's office. Sheriff Davidson looked up from his paperwork and smiled. "Grace, what brings you by?" "I wanted to thank you," I said, "for tracking me down, for making sure I knew about Eleanor and the ranch. You changed my life." He waved off the gratitude. "Just doing my job. Eleanor made me promise I'd find you and make sure you understood what she was leaving you. She knew a piece of paper couldn't communicate everything she wanted to say." "Did you know her well?" "Well enough. She helped my own family once when we were going through hard times. That's who Eleanor was. She couldn't show love in conventional ways, but she showed it through action, through helping people when they needed it most. He studied me. She'd be proud of you, you know. Word around town is you're a natural at this. I'm still learning. We all are. That's the beauty of it. As spring turned to summer again, I stood in the same spot where Sheriff Davidson had first driven me onto the ranch. So much had changed in 12 months. The scared, angry girl who'd stepped out of that truck had been replaced by someone stronger, more confident, someone who knew her own worth because she'd earned it through sweat and hard work. The ranch looked different too, not physically, but in how I saw it. Every fence line represented knowledge gained. Every animal had a story I could tell. Every building held memories of challenges overcome and lessons learned. Maria rode up on her horse, joining me at the fence line. We'd grown close over the months, our friendship built on shared struggles and mutual respect. "You thinking about Eleanor?" she asked. "Yeah, wondering what she'd think of the place now." "I think she'd be relieved. She spent her last years worried this place would die with her, that everything she and her family built would disappear. You're keeping it alive, evolving it. That's exactly what she hoped for." As summer progressed, I made a decision that felt both terrifying and right. I started the legal process to change my last name from Monroe to Hastings, not to erase where I came from, but to claim the family I'd never known I had. Eleanor and Sarah and all the strong women who came before them, they were my people, and I wanted to carry their name forward. The day the paperwork was finalized, Ben organized a small celebration at the ranch. Neighbors came from surrounding properties, bringing food and stories about Eleanor. Frank Wallace gave a toast that made everyone laugh and cry. To Eleanor Hastings, who was too stubborn to quit and too proud to ask for help, but who loved deeper than she could express. And to Grace Hastings, who inherited more than land. She inherited Eleanor's determination and strength. May the Hastings name continue for another 4 generations. Thank you for sticking with me through Grace's journey from aging out with nothing to finding her place on a 2,000-acre ranch. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever discovered family you didn't know existed? Or found belonging in unexpected places? Share your story with our community. And make sure to check out the 2 stories on your screen right now for more incredible journeys of resilience and hope. Until next time, remember that your story isn't over just because one chapter ends. Sometimes the best parts are still waiting to be written.